And Nicole, welcome. It's really a thrill for me to be sitting here, quote, fireside with you to have this chat. And if you don't mind, I'd just like to do a short get to know you for all of our audience who are here. Yep. I'll start off by saying, I really like to get to know people and understand who they authentically are. So your title is President of Ursa Space Systems. But from your bio, I also see that you're known in the satellite industry for serving in a variety of leadership positions, including as the former chair of the Space and Satellite Professionals International, board director with AAC, Clyde Space, 2 terms as the chair of the Hosted Payload Alliance, as well as vice chair for the board level positions for the Washington Space Business Roundtable and many others. So clearly, I would say that one part of your identity, along with my cat here, is being all about, you are all about space systems. In addition, as the recipient of the 2012 Future Leaders Award by the Society of Satellite Professionals International, and also as a member of the FEW, which is an invitation-only assembly of senior executive women, I also see that another side of your identity is being a powerful woman executive in a technology-driven field. And for that, I really see you as a role model for us. When we first started talking about this fireside chat, I asked you for 3 adjectives, right, that described you. And you came back with team builder, growth-oriented, and dedicated mother of 3. I truly look forward to our conversation and seeing how your many identities inform your view and perspective on the commercial remote sensing industry today and into the future. If you would, a few opening remarks.
Thank you so much for that, Sue. Yes, absolutely a pleasure and an honor, and really appreciate that warm welcome as well. And I am a fellow admirer, actually, of your background, your career, and the great work that Deloitte is doing globally as well. So yeah, really exciting opportunity to follow that last session when we think about what's happening in an operational environment and the role that space and satellite is playing today. I think from a commercial geospatial perspective, it certainly can't be overstated, the role that these capabilities have brought to bear. I think the natural inclination would have been, of course, to point to our national assets, to leverage that intelligence, leverage that, the imagery, the insights that they bring. I think what we didn't anticipate was the role that commercial would play in complementing those systems. When I was listening to the Colonel speak previously and talking about the weather having such an impact over the course of the past 9 months of visibility from a drone perspective, that's the case from a geospatial perspective as well. The beautiful optical images that you see from a Maxar, a planet, a black sky, and just incredible capabilities aren't present when there's cloud coverage. Unfortunately, in the first 6 weeks of the conflict, there were 6 days without clouds. So it really became an interesting environment for synthetic aperture radar, or SAR as we refer to it, which is more of a radar understanding of what's happening on the ground. And there we learned very quickly, as we stood up a 24/7 ops to be able to provide such insights, it was about moving away from raw pixels, raw data, and instead having analytic input. So you can understand, where is there roadway damage that may not be safe to pass or to evacuate, or whatever the case may be. So really just a powerful moment for commercial geospatial in partnership with the many national systems available to help understand an operational environment, keep people safe, present indications of where we're seeing damage or where we're seeing threat, so that critical decisions can be made. So super enthusiastic to share some of that here. And, of course, whatever's relevant from a business leader's perspective as well, happy to provide.
Yeah, that's great, Nicole. And I'd love to pick up on the thread that you talked about working in conjunction with, right, in partnership with the government, and who's using, for the most part, I think, much of their own national technical means. if you could sort of, where do you see, given this recent experience, sort of the interoperability or the continued role of commercial GEOINT and the government's role with national systems in the future? What does that look like for you?
Yeah, I'm so glad you asked that too, because it was a journey that we took in the satellite communications part of the industry. I spent 14 years before joining Ursa Space, spent 14 years at SES, which is the world's largest commercial satellite owner and operator. And one of the learnings we had over the course of almost 2 decades now in the SATCOM industry is that it's not an either or. It's sort of debunking the myth of what military satellite systems can and should do versus what commercial satellite systems can and should do. And it's really more about that combined architecture of capability. It's a very similar story on the geospatial side as well. We're a few years younger, we're actually many years younger from an industry perspective. So we're learning a lot of that now, that the interoperability and kind of the combined architecture of capabilities from both a national and a commercial perspective, and both a US and allied perspective, is critical. A good learning that we had early part of this year is just, the limitations of weather, which we talked about, cloud coverage versus, where radar needs to play a more prominent role, but even the limitations of one system. The one constellation, most of the commercial geospatial systems today have fewer than 5 satellites in them. So they're limited in terms of the number of collections they can make over one given area, and the cadence with which they can make those collections. So there's a frequency of updates of what's changing in a location. So it's not just about a commercial provider and a national system. It's about the aggregate. When you're looking at a half dozen constellations at once, now you're really lessening the time between collect, and you're able to really maximize the intelligence you have of what's changing on the ground. So really impactful time to think about the combined commercial capability and the interoperability of commercial and government together. How do we share that data? Do we keep it unclassified? I'm a big advocate of that, keeping commercial, because we can work with a degree of speed and flexibility that is not always inherent in national systems for good reason. So a really wonderful time to kind of study what we've learned over the span of this conflict and apply that for future.
Yeah, Nicole, I'm really hearing the vision of persistent surveillance and that becoming a reality for us, right? Global persistent surveillance, which to me is very exciting. You talked just there about, commercial remaining commercial and unclassified. A question for you: do you think there are certain tools, whether you want to talk about different platforms or sensor systems or actually analytic tools, that are more appropriate for one type of job over another type of job or responsibility that we have in the area of national security?
Yeah, I do. I think it's a Swiss Army knife up there. From a commercial geospatial perspective, there's a different tool for different jobs. And as I mentioned, this trend away from raw pixels, raw data into process, analytics, insights, those kinds of capabilities. The second trend that I'm seeing now is away from single sensor insights to multi-sensor insights. And so what you just referenced there, how do we bring the best of those different tools? They all play a different role. An interesting layer there to the persistent monitoring. If you're staring at a particular area or region of the world where there's a lot of activity, when you're able to layer sort of the base persistent monitoring that synthetic aperture radar can provide, sort of a tip and cue capability to higher resolution optical, where you have more of that visual image to get a sense as to what you've seen change in the SAR projection and SAR insights, that's powerful. To have both of those insights together. Layer on top of that now RF mapping, so that detection of a fixed emitter in a particular location that sends a signal within that persistent monitoring area, and then having the optical image take the high res to give a sense of what are we actually seeing that was sending that signal from an RF perspective. So definitely a moment to look at the fused capability of all of those different tools, because it is a 1 + 1 + 1 = 100 in that environment versus just having any static insight from one sensor alone.
Yeah. So as a former imagery analyst, my mind quickly goes to, holy cow, how do I know what to use? I mean, the vision that you create is really powerful, but I'm sitting there on the front lines, right? I've got to answer my customers' questions. I got to think about what does the president need in the PDB? And I've got this wealth of RF data, commercial data, SAR data, panchromatic data, analytic services. Like, what do you think is incumbent upon industry to do to help analysts know what to use when in order to address the key essential elements of information they have?
Yeah, I think it's I heard Robert Cardillo say this more recently. He said the worst thing we'd ever did for SAR was to call it an image. And I think he's exactly right. I actually, if you are on the front line and you do have an appetite for that capability and that insight as to what's changing or what's over the horizon or what is the safest way to evacuate, I don't want you to care about which tool, which sensor. I want you to care about receiving that insight most rapidly. There's potentially 10 tanks in this location that you're ready to move into that direction. I want you to know that. I don't want you to care that it came from optical, or it came from hyperspectral, it came from SAR, it came from that should not be something that crowds your mind in that moment. It should be that you have access to the insight of what you're about to approach, and you can make decisions appropriately and rapidly on the basis of those insights. So yeah, I guess that would be my instinctive reaction would be, I don't want you to care. I want the industry to come together to say, it is the true fusion, the build on these capabilities that produces those insights that are so powerful, that have enhanced geolocation accuracy because we're able to verify and validate with multiple modalities. I think that's going to be particularly key. Also, when you think about environments where perhaps certain sensors or certain technologies are not permitted, they're interrupted for one reason or another. And if we, kind of take some of the rhetoric we've heard out of Russia over the past week about, commercial geospatial, just take it a different direction. Let's say in the Asia Pacific arena, last November, China set a policy that they would no longer be broadcasting AIS signal from ships at port. Well, that's pretty powerful data. That's for all intents and purposes now a dark vessel. So their activities are no longer known. It's a fun little game of hide and seek, actually, from a geospatial community perspective, because we do have the ability of SAR. We do have the ability of, correlation between the SAR and the AIS and bringing in the RF capabilities as well, that we are still able to identify those vessels, classify those vessels, track those vessels. So again, another moment where we say, if we care so much about the specific tool, the specific sensor, then we miss this opportunity to say, okay, if one is limited for any reason, we now have this other tool that we can use to maintain that same level of intelligence.
Yeah, I really hear you talking about activity-based intelligence, something that, has really been a tradecraft being developed over the last 20 years or so. And now being able to mix and match, like, as you said, the RF data with the different modalities of imagery, allowing you to know, hey, they may be dark in RF, but I see them on the image and I've been able to track where they're moving regardless of the weather, is a very powerful capability. And re-emphasizing, I think, your point of the analyst shouldn't have to worry about which sensor type to use, but to be able to get the insights from all of that data that's relevant to their problems. I'm going to switch gears a little bit with you. So, we've sort of talked a little bit about the impact that the Ukraine-Russia war has had on the commercial remote sensing, really bringing it to the forefront as a key tool for us. I'm curious about your perspective from the pandemic. What did we learn, or what did you see emerge in the use of commercial remote sensing and the whole industry during that pandemic when most of the intelligence community was working from home?
Yeah, I think it actually was a moment to have enhanced economic indicator perspectives. I mean, to really put them in the forefront. So with the pandemic and with a lot of the shifts we've seen over the course of the past 2.5 years, there's been tremendous impact on global supply chain. When you've had reduced labor in the workforce in those early months of the pandemic, the impact globally has been, it's been enough to really cue our customers, both from a government and from a financial community perspective, to want to track some of these supply chain choke points or indicators, or what might, suggest, a relationship between the pandemic and where we've seen the movement of goods. From Ursa Space perspective, we are tracking more than 20,000 different locations every week of crude oil supply, for example. So to be able to understand what's the impact there, when we're looking at 4 billion barrels of capability on a weekly basis, pretty staggering. When you take that insight and kind of layer it with another moving commodity, let's say global auto manufacturing, for example, staring at those lots, understanding what's being exported, what's moving, where are the choke points for auto manufacturing as well. Interesting indication on what has happened from an economic perspective. When you take those two together and maybe layer it with geospatial insights of port monitoring. So we're staring at 24 of the world's busiest ports in the world and understanding the movement of vessels in and around those locations. If you're able to take that insight, layer it with the movement of oil, layer it with the movement of auto manufacturing, you have a really interesting supply chain indices there to make decisions, whether financial decisions or other, defense and intelligence decisions globally on what we're seeing. I think it's been a special opportunity, the silver lining the last couple of years with the impact that the pandemic has had, to give those insights and to make decisions even without having as much of the workforce's early days as we've had in years prior.
Yeah, Nicole, I really appreciate that. I mean, what I hear is the opening of a whole new market around the global supply chain that is both for an economic indicator for our national security, as well as how it helps in commercial business, as well as how the intelligence community can use it. So the breadth, and, I hearken back to the very, very early days when the first commercial remote sensing satellites went up, and the big question of, is this a capability that the government's going to have to subsidize? Is there really another market for this capability? And, clearly you're talking to, and we're really seeing the breadth of areas that commercial remote sensing can assist with. As you look into the future, say, looking out a decade from now, where do you see Ursa and the commercial remote sensing industry playing roles?
Yeah, I think for Ursa, we've had a really balanced portfolio of both commercial and government customers. That's particularly important for us going forward. There will be times that the commercial markets that we're serving, whether it's insurance or it's utilities or it's the financial markets or it's commercial shipping, that are really going to have that increased demand. And there'll be times when it's, sort of a lagging balance with defense and intelligence customers. Not what we're seeing today, naturally, given the current environment globally, but I think that's a really important balance for us to keep. There are a lot of things that we learn from the commercial industry that can be applied for the benefit of our government customers worldwide, and vice versa. When it's an unclassified program, there's a lot of learning that comes from what we're seeing from a defense and intelligence perspective that can help provide those insights to commercial industries as well. I think from a product perspective, it really is about those two core themes that we talked about earlier, from pixels to insights. So really focused on getting access to those analytic reports, the insights, the information that a decision maker can move quickly to save time, money, and lives because they have the answer. They don't necessarily have, waves of data to have to sort through to find the answer. That's the first piece. The second piece is moving away from single modality to multi-end, multi-sensor, and really building on the value that that provides. So we are in a really powerful position, a sweet spot, if you will, in the industry Ursa occupies today, as we have agreements in place with all of the different geospatial providers. It can be RF, SAR, optical, AIS, and we bring all of that into our platform so we can produce those insights very rapidly. We standardize the content. We have the licensing already in place so that our customers can take advantage of that fused result in a much more rapid environment. So we're excited to see that community model continue to build. And those customers commercially and from a government perspective that benefit from that.
Yeah, from pixels to insights is a really cool concept. I love that. A question that I got asked frequently when I was director of analysis at NGA is, do I ever foresee a time when analysts won't get the pixels? All they'll get are the analytics, the insights. So I'm going to ask you, do you ever foresee a time when really all of what you'll be delivering is the analytics from the fused sources of remotely sensed data that you're collecting?
I hope so. I think we're moving in that direction. The first couple of weeks, maybe the first 10 days of the conflict in Eastern Europe, that Ursa was contributing to some of the insights for NGOs, other organizations that were requesting our input. When we had first started, we were sending over those raw data files. It was coming through an S3 bucket, and it was going to individuals on their handheld devices. And of course, they're getting the spinning symbol. They're not able to download this gigantic file and make a decision. And once they do download it, it's SAR. And from a naked eye, they have no idea what this is actually telling them. So we quickly, within that first week or 10 days, got to a place where we said, okay, what we're going to have to do here is instead send you the snapshot of the report of where it's giving indicator of activity in an area of interest. You send us those areas of interest. We will send you back an assessment of what we see, whether it's simple object level change detection, vehicle detection, vessel detection, energy tower impact, roadway impact, all of those indicators. And now we were able to move the speed. We were able to provide insights that, again, saved time, money, and lives, and had that real value for those who were on the field. I believe and trust that we will build on that learning going forward, and we'll continue this shift towards the insights away from the raw data, and allow that to be a space where we all flourish. So I do. I think that's a space that we're seeing evolve right now. And I think it's necessary.
Yeah. As a trained imagery analyst, my mind is going, wow, such a different tradecraft that you're depicting for the future. And, what would you say as you talk to your clients and they say, well, what kinds of people do I need in order to be able to use what you're providing? What's your answer to that? Like, what are the skill sets, the knowledge, the experiences that you recommend your clients bring to the table to take advantage of what you're offering?
Yeah, I think our preference is to have more of a solutions orientation to customers rather than having a product on the shelf that we're pushing. Solutions orientation really means that there is transparency and openness with our customers to say, here is what we're hoping to glean insight about. Here's what we need to understand that's happening in a broad region of interest or a very specific area of interest or an object of interest. So having that transparency and openness is really critical for us to be successful. So we can return and say, yes, this is the level of accuracy from a geolocation perspective, or other levels of detection that are important to get right. I think that's particularly important. There are also different types of users of geospatial data. There's the novice end user who just needs the insight in order to be able to make a decision. And there are those who operate their own platforms today, where this is just another node that's plugging into that platform, allowing them to make those decisions. So we do have work on our side as well to continue to evolve so that we can speak to both of those communities of users. So geospatial data can truly be in the hands of individual users who have questions or curiosities about things that are changing in the world, all the way through those who have major platforms and systems that are ingesting different types of data in order to produce results.
Yeah, that's a really exciting future. And I love the vision of wanting to provide solutions for the critical questions that your customers, your clients have, and putting the power of geospatial into the hands of those users.
Absolutely.